Welcome everyone to this top task overview. So I'm going to get straight into it. I have a reasonable amount to cover in this session. The top task information design framework involves the following stages. It first begins with identification of what is most important to a particular audience and what is least important. And then we move into various design phases, which may involve content creation or architecture design based on this sort of top task data. Then there's a measurement of the performance of the top tasks and a sense of continuous improvement based on improving the performance of these top tasks. So increasing their success rate and reducing the time it is required to complete these specific tasks. So it's a type of a information design framework and management model focused on what is most important to people, identifying that and then measuring success based on their success in relation to completing those tasks. So some of the insight that you would get with a top task initiative would be really understanding who it is cares about certain things. So let's say here you're in a health environment and you've got mental well-being, stress reduction, mindfulness, positive thinking. So top task will deliver you information about which segment does that matter most to. So in this study that we did in Ireland, it was most likely to be a top task of the 18 to 25-year-old bracket. The related tasks, so tasks connected with this. So with this method, we can also analyze how people voted, because they tend to vote in patterns. So if they choose one task, they don't randomly choose other tasks. There tend to be connections between the voting behavior. So we can see from this that they were statistically more likely to also vote for harmful habit reduction, quitting smoking, alcohol, drugs, diet, food, nutrition as well. So in this mental well-being, we see that harmful habit reduction and diet, food, nutrition are in the orbit of this mental well-being. They're connected, certainly in the minds of the people out there. The other element in the experience element, so there's three components to the identification phase, the actual design of the study. There's the actual task list, there's the segmentation, which allows us to identify demographics, age, etc. And then there's the experience elements that we call the customer centric index, which allows you to identify, in relation to them trying to complete their task, what is it that's most important to them. And in this environment, we can say that plain language is more important than any of the other for any of the other tasks, and that men are less likely to rank mental well-being as a top task. So another segmentation type of question. So this top task, the objective is to give you this sort of insight into your audience, what really matters to them and what doesn't matter to them. So as I said, there's three elements in this the task identification. So I'm going to talk about three major sections of top task. First is task identification. Then you've got the task performance indicator. So how well are these top tasks performing? And then the third one is the top task architecture. How do we create an information architecture based on the top task data? But in the actual task identification, the essence of it has three components. The task list, which is most of the work. The experience or the feeling, which is the customer-centric index, the issues around, is it hard or easy to find information on the site? What is the search engine like? Those sorts of things. And the grouping or basically experience segmentation factors. So a comprehensive task identification tends to have these three parts in the actual survey. And it is, as you'll see, a survey. It's a very particular type of survey. So the essence of task identification, and the essence of top task is that it's a table, it's a hierarchy, where at the top you see these things are really important. So this is, again, the health environment. In Ireland, we see waiting times, mental well-being, costs and fees, screening, diagnosis. So we went out and we asked, in dealing with your health, what's most important to you? And this is what people came back with. And we see these colours, the yellows represent the first 25% of the vote. So there were over 70 tasks in this, and yet we see about, is it 7 or 8? I think it's 8 here, get the first 25% of the vote. This is the top task concept, that there's a relatively small set of things that get a disproportionate vote. The green is the 25 to 50%. So generally, I consider the top task family as the yellow and green tasks. So you're getting a hierarchy, you're getting a league, you're getting an importance as it goes down. And yes, people, most people say, oh, are you asking people to vote on that entire list? Yes. It's the madness and the genius of it is the single list and randomly presented. So we find with this that at the very bottom, events and conferences got 22 votes out of 17,634 cast. So that's the bottom task. And the top task basically got 871 votes, waiting times, out of 17,000 casts. So there's usually this huge difference between the top task and the tiny task. And the model in top task is focus on your top task, because these are way more important to way more people in the environment. So task identification typically takes about 8 to 12 weeks. Customer and scope, I'm going to talk a little bit more about these, typically takes about a week. Gathering task sources, I'm going to explain a little bit about those. So you're gathering together, because the first thing is to define the environment. What is it we're dealing with? When we did it for COVID-19 for the World Health Organization, or buying a car for Toyota, what is it that matters to people when they're buying a car? So you're gathering all the sources, the possible sources. Then shortlisting. So oftentimes there's hundreds of things, hundreds of rough tasks there, and the shortlisting process is to bring them definitely under 100. The vast majority of studies that we have done in the last 10 years are somewhere between 50 and 80. That's typically, the number. Sometimes you'll have less, sometimes you'll have more, but let's say 80% of them or 90% tend to be between 50 and 80. So the task sorters and the shortlisting to clean it up and to bring it to a list. Then the survey design, and the essence of that is that long randomized list where people are asked to choose no more than 5 from the list. And the voting, which can take up to a couple of weeks, it depends. You're trying to get a minimum of 400 voters. Well, you really need an absolute minimum of, say, 200 or so. But if you get 400, you're in good, solid territory. We just did one this week actually for vaccine top task, where we got 4,000 in a couple of days because it's such a big issue. And then you're analysing and presenting. So it's somewhere 10 to 12 weeks. So in relation to the scope, I think it's important to keep the scope as broad as possible. So years ago, we were doing Lancashire Council in the UK. And as we did our research, we noticed that people were talking about health and hospitals and stuff like that. And we brought that data back, and the council says, but that's not us, that's the National Health Service. That's not us. But we're saying it's coming up in the data and it's coming up in the sources. Shouldn't we leave it in the list and see how people vote? How are we going to phrase this in living in your Lancashire, and dealing with the council, what's most important to you? Generally speaking, the broader the scope, the better. When we did Toyota, we didn't say on the Toyota website. We didn't even say in buying from Toyota. We ultimately framed it in buying a car. The broader, the better from a mental perspective. People find it easier to understand these broader, I'm buying a car. Most people don't set out and say, I'm definitely going to buy a Toyota car. So the broader you can make it, the better. So we see here, this was the old one, and this was classic kind of organization structures of main sections and content types and not local information, quite confusing. And when we did the top task, we saw that health and hospitals and health authorities were number 3. That was a big surprise. So they took that data and they designed a new structure: jobs, health and social care, waste, emergencies and crime, libraries and records. So that's one outcome of a top task project, a task-based architecture that we find is vastly easier for people to understand and to use than either audience-based or whatever other models that you might choose. And the health and social care, most of that was not their own content. They worked with the NHS to link to appropriate things in relation to that. So keep the scope as broad as possible. Developing the list, and refining the list. The more people you have from different parts of your organization, the better. So marketing, sales, support, R&D, finance, research, IT, digital products, HR, this might be for an intranet. The better the end list will be, the better the discussions will be, and the greater the engagement and the buy-in and the likelihood that top tasks will be success. This is one of the key success factors we have found over the years. If you only have a small group of people just from comms, the chances of that being top task being successful are very, very low. If you have lots of people involved representing different parts of the organization, you get much richer conversations. You end up with a much better task list that has a much more consensus within the organization, and you get much higher buy-in later on for your efforts when you deliver the actual results. So you're wanting, these people and their opinions, and obviously they're not all going to be smiling when they're doing all this shortlisting. It's hard to get people who don't smile these days when you're looking for pictures of people on deposit photos or whatever the sites are. But so they're working together and saying, oh, this one shouldn't be on the list, or merge this one with this one. It's much, much better when you've got opinions coming from different groups. You get a far richer, better designed actual task list. So that's one of the keys to success. Get people involved from numerous environments. Now, typically these shortlisting groups are somewhere between 3 and 8 people, depending on the size of the website. We've done it in the European Union where we've had 100 people in the room. But basically, most times, somewhere between 3 and 8 people, that's a quite manageable group in those sorts of numbers. One of the things you're thinking about quite early on as well is that, remember I showed earlier the 3 things, the group, the task, and the group, and the feeling. The feeling experience stuff, I'm not going to go through. That tends to be more standard, but confusing menus and links, helpful menus and links. But the segmentation and the category questions, you want to be talking about these quite early on, because the way you segment, the type of segmentation questions that you ask, allows you to segment the data later on. And if you don't ask the right segmentation questions, you can't do the rich segmentation of the data that will deliver you deeper insight. So should we segment by geography? This, I believe, was for the OECD. And you see here, oh, they're sharing. So yellow tasks are sharing. Oh, the tasks are very similar across the continents, except Africa is a little bit different. What's Africa? Oh, monitoring policy implementation is a top task for them, but it's not such a big task for the other groups in the process. So you're able to see, so the segmentation questions. Now, typically no more than 8 segmentation questions, because you don't want the survey to get too long. But thinking and talking with your group about the segmentation questions is an important part of the process as well. Another thing we do, which has been quite useful over the years, is talk about doing a team survey or a stakeholder survey. So this is what we did with the OECD. So once we had the survey designed, we created a copy of it, and then we just said, well, what do you think people want? What do you think your customers want? And then you can compare the organizational view with the customer view. And we see here that it maps quite well. This is the empathy score. The only red or thing that's out of sync is the task overview of what the OECD does. The team thinks it's 4 times more important than the customer does. So this empathy analysis between the organization and the customer can give us some interesting insights as well. When you're developing your task list, basically try and have 80% of the sources coming from the customer's world. But don't forget, some of the sources need to come from the organizational world, the strategy, senior management opinions, etc. You can't exclude the organizational view, but the customer world sources should dominate. And these are things like communities, blogs, peer or competitor type websites, health and support, social media, search, your own internal search engine and Google if it's appropriate, the most visited web pages, media analytics, surveys, stakeholders, feedbacks, wherever you can gather or discover insights into what people want. And you bring all that stuff together. We use a spreadsheet. We pile it into a spreadsheet. That's the building of the initial, what we call long list. And then we bring it together into a short list. And that's with the group, the shortlisting group. So it's not the hardest process is going from the long list to the short list. It requires quite a bit of effort and attention. And I'm not going to go into great depth in it today, but just one thing to say, you're always looking for the language of the customer. You're always saying, do they understand? Is it called COVID-19 or is it called coronavirus? What are people calling it? What are people familiar with? The top task will not work if the final list is not in the language of the people you are asking to vote on it. If it's just in the language of the doctors and you want patients to vote on it, that's not going to work. So the key thing you're always looking at, is this how people call it? Is this the word? Is this the language that they actually use? And yes, it is a mad, crazy single list, and it's randomized. That is part of the magic of it and part of why we can do so much rich analysis in so many ways with it. A single list, somewhere between 50 and 80, randomized, presented. You're asking people to choose no more than 5 from this particular list. So as I said earlier, the top task flowing out of the scope in buying a car, choose up to 5 of the most important things to you in dealing with health. So we're not even talking about digital. Don't get it out of all the worlds of the organization and the format and the environment. The more you do that, the more you get it into the world of the people you're asking to vote. Because they don't think so much digital or physical. In dealing with IT, choose up to 5 challenges, choosing a satellite navigation system, select up to 5 words or phrases. In choosing university, select up to 5 factors that are most important to you. So just to give you a sense of the framing and the scoping and what people are actually being asked to do. This is one of the key charts I've presented over the years of the outcome once they've done the actual study. So this, again, the OECD and this, country surveys, compare country statistical data, statistics on a particular topic, browse a publication for free. 4 tasks, get as much of the vote as the bottom 49. Top tasks and tiny tasks. And interestingly, we find it's often the tiny tasks where the organizational effort is, and the top tasks are being ignored for a whole variety of actual reasons. So when people see this, they begin to think, wow, there's a lot of concentration of effort there. And we can see the top task has as many votes as the bottom 28 tasks put together. So we're really beginning to see concentration of what people want. So there's 10 tasks in the first 50% of the vote. So here, as I said earlier, ideally you're looking for about 400. You really need to be getting about 100 definitely. And, it depends on the environment. Some environments come together really, really quickly in the consensus, but others need certainly up around 400. This was in the European Union, where we had 107,000 people voting. That was unbelievable. We've never had anything even remotely close to that over the years. But what we found was that by 30 voters, the top three tasks had emerged: research and innovation, funding and grants, and EU law. So when we stopped the survey at 107,000 voters, it was the same three tasks as were there at the first 30 voters. So this is a very powerful method to very quickly identify the critical top tasks in the environment. And it's worked, upwards of 600 times this stage. We have never had a failure. We've never had a failure, and we're doing this for over 15 years. We've never had a situation where top tasks did not emerge. And then, of course, this is the segmentation question, and we're able to see, hey, look, it's the same stuff that people want across all the countries. This was back in 2014 when we did it. So, if you'd be seeing lots of white coming in up here near the top, or lots of turquoise, you'd be, oh yeah, well, maybe we need different structures for different countries. But what this tells us is we can have a common architecture based around research and innovation, law and funding and education and training and strategy that'll work for no matter where you are, whether you're in Ireland or in Germany or in Finland. This is another thing we've introduced in the last couple of years into the analysis, which we call the connections. So we look here and we say for the people, this was a WHO study on COVID-19, for people who voted for vaccine, for this task, vaccine development, availability, how else did they vote? So the next thing that they were most likely to vote for was drugs. The next thing they were most likely to vote for was immunity, then food and medicines, then end date, new normal. So this kind of gives you a connection, mental connections, that tasks are often connected mentally in people's brains with other tasks. So this gives you, with the single list and the segmentation questions, you can get this sort of insight. And then here we can see, and these people were statistically more likely to come from Canada. Their number one, their concern tended to be more about a family, an adult in their family. They were infrequent users of the website. They were not essential workers, and the relationship was individual or family in the process. So here, for those people who voted for latest news, latest research, the next most important thing was original outbreak source. This was done back around May. Then it was myths, fake news, misinformation, research papers, drugs, treatment lessons learned. They were likely to say that the menus and links were confusing. So there's an indication that they're finding it hard to find latest news. They were from the general public. Their gender tended to be female. They were using the website on a weekly basis. So they were coming on a weekly basis looking for latest news, and they were finding a lot of confusing menus and links. So see the type of insight you can get when you combine the task list, the segmentation question, and the experience type questions. So that's the task identification. There will be room for questions, but I'll keep moving on to the task performance indicator, which is the next phase. So this slide, I've been showing this for maybe 15 years, and it was when we did a lot of work with Tetra Pak, but it still holds true very, very strongly. And one of the managers used to bring their publishers in and saying to them, if you don't spend time and you don't, write the content well and put good metadata on it, you're making the employees who need to find this spend a lot of time. So if you only spend 10 minutes, they'll have to spend 60 minutes looking for it or trying to understand the policy or the procedure. Whereas if you spend, 60 minutes on it, they need to spend much less. And the reason why, in a way, top tasks is hard to get going in organizations is that this is measured, the publisher's time, but the time of the employee trying to find it and trying to use it is not measured. And of course, we see that there's much more benefit to the organization, whether these are customers or employees, if you actually make it easier and faster for people to find and to do things. But because we don't measure this time, it's not managed and nobody cares about it. And Top Tasks is about managing this sort of time, the time of the people who are coming to the actual environment. How long is it taking them? How successful are they? So that's a key component of the philosophy or the idea behind the task performance indicator. It's also meant to run over time, to be a continuous improvement model. So here we see we were testing bug search information on Cisco over a number of years, and it was really, really bad. It was really hard to find bug fix troubleshooting type of information. So here these were very low scores, and then the team did a prototype for the May 2013 study of a change, and then they said, the success rate jumped to 50%. Still not great, but it's much better than what it was. And then they brought that back to management, and they got some budget, but obviously they weren't able to build the thing immediately, so the success rate dropped again. And then in July 2014, they launched, and it wasn't great, and it went to 35%. But then by December 2014, they had improved things. They iterated forward. They were up to 65%. You're certainly aiming for 80% success rate as a kind of baseline measures. But you can see how this helps you. Had they not got this data, presenting this data regularly, they would have never have got the budget to improve the bug search, or it would have been much more difficult. But because we were reporting back these poor success rates, we were able to convince the management, and then to show with a prototype, ran a pilot test, solution implemented. So where do we get the task to measure? Well, it comes from the Top Task study. So you can't do the task performance indicator until you've done the actual Top Task study. Typically, there's about 10 to 12 tasks. This is a theoretical in 100 type of environment. So typically, it's all the yellow and maybe half of the actual green. So you're looking at in around 10 tasks. On the left, that's in a theoretical 100 task environment. So in testing the number of people, about 13 to 18. In traditional usability, they say about 3 to 8 will identify core problems, and that's often the truth. But what we're trying to do is get some reasonable metrics of 2 key metrics, the success rate and the time and task. And we find that about 15 or so people, we begin to get more stable success rate. We can say that it's a 40% success rate, and it's 90 seconds to actually do this task. So we see here, so these are the sort of instructions. Pretend you have forgotten the password for the Cisco account and take whatever actions are required to log in. So that's an example of perhaps a troubleshooting type of task. So we see over time, it got better, got up to 100%, and then it dropped because there was a bug in the system or something went wrong, and that's why you need to be continuously measuring over time. And then they identified that problem, then it went back up to 100% again. So one of the things, as well as we're developing the task performance indicator, is the journeys for the task instructions. So we need to have a target time. So in order to define a target time, we have to define an expected customer journey. We expect them to click here, then to click here, then to click here, then to click. Here's the path or the journey we expect them to actually go on. And that's going to take that should take 60 seconds. Okay, so our target time is 60 seconds. Actually, look, it's taking them 5 minutes. So if 5 minutes doesn't make any sense, if you don't know what the target time is, you don't know whether it's good or bad in the process. So you're defining customer journeys along with your instructions. The sessions are remote. Well, today everything is remote, but over the last 10 or 15 years, we've been doing them remote. There's a lot of benefits to doing these remote sessions. You literally set up a meeting with a Zoom or a WebEx or a GoToMeeting with people. It typically takes about an hour. You bring them through and you give them these instructions. Pretend you've lost your password. What do you do then? Download the latest firmware for the RV/over2 router. Giving them, that would be an example of download software in the environment. So what are you looking out for? One is random. Oh, that person clicked on this. That's random. Two people clicked on this and then they clicked on this. Well, that's interesting. Definitely make a bit of a note of that. But if it's 3 or more people, that's a finding. So you're looking for key findings and recommendations. So typically for each task, it's no more than 3 findings, right? 3 major things that you discovered. They went this and then they reverted to search, but it needs to be at least 3 people doing that for it to be an actual finding. And then you've got a recommendation that we think you could fix this if we did this in the process. And typically a finding is about, a problem in the actual environment. And you're presenting type of results like in this, some sort of format like this. One slide, your success rate. So you're measuring, were they able to complete that task? So in this, we had a 40% failure rate. And then how long was it taking them in the process? How long was it taking them to complete the actual task? So the idea is to move these figures to the left, to get more and more people into the shorter time frames in the focus. So these become your core, dashboard or whatever it is, your metrics of success. Basically, 2 core metrics that actually matter in the process. Top task architecture. So this doesn't happen every time in every project, but some people come to us and say, how do we build something from this top task data in the app or in the website that it's more intuitive to find the top task? So we begin with the top task results. We create a sort based on those results. So we go out and ask people to sort and to group that. We get classes from that, classifications, hypothetical. We get our task instructions. They're not exactly the same as the task performance indicator task instructions. They're a much more simplified version. I'll show you examples. And typically then we go back out with those task instructions with the hypothetical classes and ask a group of people, where would you click to solve this task? Typically it takes about 3 rounds of testing, and basically we're aiming for an 80 to 90% success rate. In other words, 80 to 90% of the time they're clicking on the classes that we expected them to click on. So here with the European Union, there was over 70 in the total list. So you don't send out the entire list for sorting. Number one, it's too much for people. It's a lot for people, 70 or 60 or 70 tasks. But number 2, you want to create a structure that is oriented towards the top task. Now, the whole 70 will fit in this structure. It's just they won't dominate in any way. They'll have to fit at lower levels of the actual structure. So typically, we take about 30, maybe 35 maximum of the top tasks, starting from the top task downwards, and then we go out and we ask people, typically you want a minimum of 15 to sort, ideally 30 or more. You don't need a lot to get reliable sorting. Certainly you get 50, you're going to get very, very solid data, but anything from 15 upwards begins to give you some good data. So you're asking people to sort and to group. How would you group? How would you sort these tasks? So you're looking for, a minimum of 15 people to do that. Then you begin to see patterns. Begin to see, harmful habit reduction, mental well-being, exercise, diet, food is together as well. So here we see climate change, global warming, and environmental protection. 87% of people grouped those two together. 80% of people grouped find a job in another EU country and working in an EU country together. But we see here statistics and forecasts. Nobody, this is what we call an orphan. Anything that's where there's under 50% connection is relatively weak type of actual connection. So what happens to an orphan? Well, if it's a top task, so if it's in the top task family, then it'll probably need to be at the top of the architecture, because otherwise it'll be very difficult to find. If it's a tiny task, it just has to live lower down in the architecture, and hopefully it'll be found through search. So the instructions, remember, the instructions are not this, you're doing this sort of thing in Optimal Workshop. This is not on the actual website. You're just creating a hypothetical architecture based on the sort, hypothetical classification. And then you're asking people to, find the waiting times and where would you click? So we expect them in this round to click on Find Services, find information on how to get help, how to help a child cope with bereavement in the family. We expect them to click on mental and physical well-being. So there's the expectations. There's the hypothetical classification here on the right, and the task instruction. So they can be relatively simple because it's just one click, it's one selection that we're actually looking for. But we want a good few of these, at least 15. So there kind of should be one for every task that you got sorted. That's a reasonable rule, but you want a good few of them because you want to really road test the classification. If you don't test it with a reasonably wide variety of tasks, you won't really see the potential weaknesses in your classification. So it's important when you're testing that you test with a reasonable number. So here we're building this up. A researcher wants to start a new project, find out if there's an EU grant available. That's an example of funding, grants and subsidies. So then we're saying we expect them to click on funding. So that's our hypothesis. That's where we expect people to actually go. And then when we go out and did the testing, just 48% clicked on funding. And you see how 48% clicked on research and innovation. So a researcher wants to start a new project, find out if there's an EU grant available. And this is a classic example of what we call twins. For many tasks, there are two dominant mental models or mental journeys that customers have. Sometimes I call it the object and the subject oriented. So you want to get your car serviced, you've got a Prius. Some people will go to Toyota website and they'll go to the owner section and they'll go to servicing, but other people will go to the car section of the website and they'll go to Prius and then they'll look for servicing. So you get that object or subject here. Some people are thinking, oh, it's a funding task, but other people are thinking, no, it's a research and innovation task. So for many of these, you need to have two environments. Doesn't mean you have two sets of content, but that you have two journeys. One journey through funding and one journey through research and innovation. So when you go to research and innovation, there'll be a link for funding connected with research and innovation. So then in round two, so this is the new hypothesis. So then in round two, we're showing, whoa, we're happy days, we're at 92% success rate. So that's the type of work you're doing, evidence-based, to see is the classification working, and you're building a top task classification or top task structure. So here, very briefly about near the end, in relation to Toyota. So we went out and we found this type of group that was new within the Toyota environment. It ended up becoming what was called space and room. So boot space, seating capacity, seats and legroom. And they had never organized data like this before in their specifications environment. And we did this particular study in the UK and Norway, obviously in Norway and Norwegian, and we found the same mental grouping coming true. So, but then when we tested, we found that broadly it worked except in Norway. Does air conditioning normally come with a Prius? There was a lot of false people going to this section when we didn't want them to go for this air conditioning. It was just a space and room. What has it got to do with air conditioning? But then when we talked to the Norwegian people, they said, "Oh, coupe. People can understand coupe about as something broader, about the interior, the entire interior of the environment of the actual car." So then for the next round, we just left it as place, so space, which stands for space, and the negative clicks dropped to zero in the actual process. So managing, getting the language right in your architecture, so important. Number one reason confusing menus and links over the years. And now Toyota are rolling out this section in their specifications called space and room, which was fed from that data coming from the Top Task actual project. Typically, to get this sort of a good result, typically takes about 3 rounds of actual testing in the process. So the top task information design framework, identify those top tasks, do design, do measurement in the process, and you're improving based on the success of those top tasks. Is the success rate improving? Is the time and task reducing? So just to let you know, in February, I'll be doing an online session of this. We'll be digging a good bit deeper, 10-hour session over 5 days, 5 two-hour sessions. And there's a 10% off at the site before the 31st of December of this month if you put in that specific code. So the site thisisdoing.com is the site. And if you're interested as well, I brought out a book a couple of years ago, a real manual, how-to manual on how to do this, a how-to guide top tasks. And you'll find it on jerrymcgovern.com or in all the major bookstores as well. So that is the presentation. We're open to questions. Any questions? I see some already, but please fire away your questions. So, yeah, we've got about 15 minutes for questions. What software do you use for the initial top task survey? Practically any software survey software works this time. For years, Heather, we used SurveyMonkey, but we've used a load of software. Easy Feedback now, we're using a German company for GDPR, within the European Union type of issues. But most survey software is now able to deal with that task type of question. So any further questions or issues that people have, please ask them now if you have them. A recording of this session will be made available as well. So often there's questions coming in, but I don't see any. I must have done a very good job at answering or daily. Oh, there are some coming in. How often do you recommend retesting or validating that tasks are still valid? The task environment tends to be quite stable, Adrian. So, it's typically every 3 to 5 years that we do in most typical environments. Now, with something like a pandemic, COVID-19, you might be doing it, every 3 to 6 months because it's a really fast moving, fast changing. Depends to a degree on the environment you're operating within. But, universities are buying cars, it's the same things, over time environmental issues are going to rise, etc. But typically we wouldn't redo a top task, a minimum for study for 3 years. Now the task performance indicator we typically do every about 6 or 12 months. It is based on the ability to make changes. So when you do your first task performance indicator, you're going to have a set of recommendations. if you haven't implemented those recommendations, then there's not much point in redoing the task performance indicator, because you're going to essentially get the same results coming back in the process. Maybe you want to do that to show management that, look, it's not getting any better in the process. Okay, some more. Heather, how would you adapt this for an intranet? Or would you? About 40% of these are intranet studies over the years, Heather. So it works just as well. It's, you know, the intranet, it's about finding people, collaboration, claiming expenses, you know, data, storing data, or whatever it is. You know, the intranets tend to be more task focused than many environments do. So it works really well. And then there's very common tasks that emerge in intranets over time. Any further questions, or is that the last of the actual questions? Okay, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. Thanks very much. Do you think twins as one task or two? Well, twins are one task. It's two journeys. So I want to download software for the RV/2. Some people will go to the RV/2 product page and they'll look to download the software. Other people will go to the to the support section and they'll look for download software. So it's not that there's two tasks. There's often two dominant journeys that we need to design for many tasks. Rarely is there a single dominant journey where 80 or 90% kind of consensually go to try and solve it. Sometimes it happens, but many times for many tasks, there's two environments. So it's a single task, and of course you're not duplicating the content. You're not. It's two journeys, a single content space. So Alex, hello Alex. How do you handle a situation if you have a very small number of users, such as a small private community site? You may be not able. Yeah, it depends. Like what we found, Alex, that even at 25, 30 people in a segment, at the European Union, the top 3 tasks. So there's a kind of a mathematical or statistical rule. The number 1 task will appear very early. So at about 15 voters, the top task will definitely be within the first 5. And at about 25 voters, it'll probably be within the first 3. And at about 50 voters, the top task will probably be, it'll be number 1 or number 2. So, you know, a smaller group will identify your real top tasks at, you know, your top 3. But you don't want to be saying, oh, number 10 is really solid. Number 10, you know, could jump to number 15 or stuff like that. So you'll discover the very top with the further you go out with more people voting, the more solidity you have further down the list in the process. So the smaller the group you have, the less you need to be taking the 26 task with a pinch of salt and saying, oh, because it could probably go to 15, it could probably go to 45 in the process. But you with a couple of hundred people, your top 5 tasks will probably be very solid in the process. So you get, the larger the numbers, the deeper the insight. Smaller numbers, you'll get more insight, but about a smaller set of the tasks, more up at the top of the actual task list. But as I said, you know, at the European Union, at 30 people, the top 3 tasks had emerged, and they were the exact same top tasks as when we closed it with 107,000 people voting. So, you know, those top 3 tasks tend to emerge quite quickly. And the top 5, certainly at about 100 voters, you'd expect that the top 5 are beginning to solidify. So, yes, Alex, from Microsoft, we've so many years, for years, I used to go out to Microsoft in 2003 to 2008, giving these top task workshops, and it's still going, Alex. We're doing it for COVID and different stuff. It's still method is still working, and you know, I don't know, maybe it's people are bored with it at this stage, but it's still delivering results, and the method still works. It's 600 times 500,000 people at this stage. So if you're any interest in it for your organization or yourself, you're looking at doing it yourself, join the online course, get training, or buy the book, or please get in touch if you feel that your organization needs help in implementing it. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a great end to the year, a very difficult year for everybody. 2021 with the vaccine, you know, things will, you know, get better. We've a couple of difficult months ahead of us, that's for sure. But let's be hopeful that by next summer we'll be seeing a better world emerging. So thank you for listening, and I wish you a great day, and health and happiness for 2021 and beyond. Thank you very much, and goodbye.